Welcome to Insider Events, Transforming HR in the Digital Era, presented by Paycom. Here's our host, Insider Careers Editor, Caroline Harancic.
The HR digital revolution is here. Hi, I'm Caroline Harancic, Careers Editor here at Insider. I'll be your host for today's event, presented by Paycom. Today's conversations will explore the direct link between employee and customer experience. We will discuss how HR can improve performance management, talent acquisition, and people analytics to create more diverse and inclusive workforces. This is an important conversation to have right now as HR teams consider the role technology will play in the post-pandemic workplace. We'd love for you to share your thoughts by using the hashtag #InsiderEvents. We want this to be an engaging conversation, so check out the dashboard at the bottom of the screen where you can submit questions for our panelists. And finally, we want to know what you enjoyed most about today's event and what we could be doing better. Please take our survey, which you can do by clicking at the icon on the bottom of the page. And now, I'm pleased to introduce our first session. Insider's career and strategy reporter Aman Kidwai is moderating a conversation around continuous performance management. Take it away, Aman.
Thanks, Caroline. Hey, everyone. My name is Aman Kidwai. I'm a careers reporter at Insider. We're here today to talk about performance management. It's a very important topic, but something that we know that we need to reconsider during these rapidly changing times. I'm joined today by Kelly Jordan from IBM to help us discuss this. Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and background at IBM?
Hi, Aman. Thanks for having me today. I'm the Director of Career Skills and Performance, and so I've got responsibility for IBMer career mobility, career paths and journeys, as well as our end-to-end performance culture. So I'm really helping IBMers to be their best.
Great. Thank you, Kelly, so much for joining us today. We're also joined by Delita Costin from Grove Collaborative. Delita, why don't you tell us what you do there?
Great. Thanks, Aman. Hi, Kelly. Good to see you all. I am the Chief Legal and People Officer at Grove Collaborative, and in my capacity on the people side, my job is to oversee all things people, which concern performance management, talent acquisition, and some of the other ideas and areas of HR that you're all used to.
Excellent. Well, we are so lucky to be joined by both of you, and thank you so much for taking the time. To start, let's set the stage here. Kelly, first of all, why is performance management so important? What does it accomplish for your organization?
It's a great question, and I would actually argue that it's a bit of a broader statement, not just performance management, but really a culture of performance. For us, we're focused on 4 tenets of our transformation: growth, innovation, inclusion, and feedback. And a culture of performance really drives all of those components, most especially growth and feedback. For employees, really for IBMers, those are critical. Having a culture of feedback, candid feedback, is really important to helping all of us grow. And when we grow, IBM grows. But I would say a bit more practically, having a clear structure and a framework around performance, just in general, gives employees that guidance and that clarity about what they need to do to continue to succeed.
And Delita, for you, same question. What does performance management mean for Grove Collaborative?
Right. Well, I agree with Kelly that it's broader than simple performance reviews. And one of the really great things about Grove Collaborative that I love is that we are growing very, very, very quickly, and our responsibilities and our roles are changing as well. And performance management is a way to help employees navigate the different steps within that transition. So all of the ideas that we think of when we think of performance management around feedback and continuous improvement and setting expectations is important, but we can't do that if we don't also wrap our employees in a program that enables them to get the training that they need. So our performance process is really one where we think about career development training. We think about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. We think about feedback and how do we teach those things. We think about bringing the business results into the world of our employees in a way that they can understand. And in that way, as we make those transitions from a small company to a large company, we hope that we are able to enable our employees to be better.
Great. Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing that. So we know that not too long ago, there was a standard way of doing performance reviews. Maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, you sit down with your manager and have this, pretty straightforward conversation that may or may not get into much detail or offer much to the employee or the manager. Kelly, how did you guys start to move your process away from that standardized model that used to be really common?
Yeah. We actually started that journey about 5 years ago. We used to have, as you mentioned, that annual process, a single rating. You would sit down at the beginning of the year, you would set your goals, you would completely forget about it. And then come December, you would spend hours and hours trying to remember what you had accomplished, and it would all culminate just in a single numeric rating. So about 5 years ago, we started a journey, really co-creating with our employees, to a program that we now call Checkpoint. And so it has gone to a program of continuous performance, where we set goals in an agile, iterative manner throughout the course of the year, where we have regular checkpoints between employees and managers on progress. And as we do year-end assessments, they're actually multidimensional. So you're no longer receiving just a single numeric rating. You're actually receiving a rating across 5 different dimensions: business results, client success, innovation, responsibility to others, and skills. And we also did away with that team-based decision-making experience. And so it's really about your personal achievements for the year. It's not a comparison between you and a different employee. And we're continuing on that journey. So it's been really successful, but over the past several months, we've actually launched a new tool to support this experience. We've brought together that traditional performance structure that we co-created and added feedback into it. So now employees have one tool that they can use not only to set their goals, to have conversations with managers, but also to give and receive feedback. And we're continuing to iterate by improving that experience, improving the process, and really repositioning performance to be less of that look back and more of a look forward and a celebration of how we can grow, right? We don't want performance to be something that employees dread. We want it to be something that excites them as they think through what their achievements are going to be looking ahead to that next quarter and through the rest of the year.
Great. And Delita, what about you? What have you guys been doing to try to move away from that traditional model of performance management, which we know has limitations?
Right. Well, in 2020, we did away with performance reviews altogether. And it started with our essential workers. We had about 1,000 people when the pandemic started who had to go into work every single day. And I'm sure all of you remember what it was like, but I was, checking the new guidelines really on a daily basis because they were changing daily and weekly and hourly sometimes. And we have employees in different states. So I was really trying to understand with the teams what the requirements would be for our people and how do we keep them safe. So in a lot of ways, performance management started with our essential workers because what we were seeing is that people were really struggling to make the change in just a pandemic mode at all. People were worrying about childcare. People were worried about their elders. We have a majority Brown and Black population within our company in the essential workspace especially. And there were rules around in different states who could be on the roads to go to work early in the pandemic. So we gave out my phone number and my CEO's phone number to all of our employees so that they could get to work. And in watching how the pandemic was impacting our essential workers, we realized that there were changes that were being impacted as well on our office workers as well. And we really didn't want to initiate a process that took so much time. And as Kelly says, doesn't always have the benefits that are long lasting. So we took the opportunity to completely scrap the process and really try to find ways to address our workforce where they were with the challenges that were going on with the pandemic, but also to introduce and layer in programs that would help them give feedback to each other. So we had feedback and training sessions on feedback and coaching. We introduced JEDI, equity, diversity, and initiative programming. We really created a dynamic where people could practice those skills upwards and downwards and really come to a place where they were better equipped to have conversations about roles and responsibilities that are shifting so quickly because of the external environment, but also because of the internal environment as the company continues to grow.
Wow. So I think that's such an incredible move to be eliminating performance reviews. Really interesting decision. Just to follow up on that really quickly, what have been the takeaways from doing that? Do you guys feel like, do the employees feel like they benefited from it? What was the response like?
Right. Well, we've reset them for 2021, but the difference in 2021 is that they are built on the skills and they are still designed to force all of us to practice the skills of feedback, coaching, upwards conversations, which are really important. I mean, performance reviews, we think of them as our managers giving us a score, but it's equally important for us to be able to have conversations with our managers about what's important, where am I doing well, what can I improve, and here's how I see my career going, and here's how I see my benefit and contribution to the company being able to take shape. So we did reset those performance reviews in 2021, but they're refreshed, they're a lot more streamlined, there's a lot more opportunity for up and down and collateral or same line conversations and feedback to come in. And the wonderful thing about Grove and a company that's growing, I've been at a bunch of companies. I was at Pandora Media and CNET Networks. We're always growing. And at a company like Grove that's growing, I'm sure that performance management will also continue to grow as we listen to what our employees need, because the company changes so quickly from month to month, year to year as well.
So Kelly, from your end, you mentioned that, reshaping performance management has been a process you started about 5 years ago. How did the pandemic alter those plans, accelerate any plans? What have the past 14 months been like as you're in the midst of, a transformation?
We've actually been doing a lot of the same things that Delita mentioned. Our focus on feedback has been really significant, especially throughout the pandemic, and is going to be continuing onwards, because feedback is such a core tenet to how individuals improve, how they have relationships. We started a new feedback framework. We launched some really fantastic new digital learning around feedback. So we've got both digital learning to enable all IBMers, as well as targeted workshops to help managers specifically get much better about giving candid feedback. We've also focused on internal career mobility, coaching and mentoring as part of that growth and performance discussion. So we've launched new tools around career growth, as well as coaching to help all IBMers find a coach or a mentor to help them. We actually had done a survey the end of last year, really trying to understand where IBMers were with regard to mentorship. And we found that 44% of our respondents really wanted a mentor but didn't know how to go about doing that. And so one of these new tools that we've launched during the pandemic is actually to help IBMers find a mentor that maybe they would have prior, bumped into at the water cooler, but that now everybody's working from home, we needed to connect them in a digital way. And so it uses a variety of different data points as well as personal preferences to recommend mentors through an algorithm, which is really exciting. And we're really just finding that integration of our feedback tool, it was well loved by those who used it, but because it was a separate tool, it didn't always have the greatest uptake of what we had. And so the new feedback tool being integrated into our end-to-end performance system, which really supports and is underpinned by those conversations, has increased the amount of written feedback IBMers are getting by about 100% year over year, just in the couple of months since it's been live. And then that underpinning of all of our enablement is really driving more meaningful conversations for all of our employees.
Nice. That's really great to hear. To follow up on something you said earlier, just in that we're talking about performance management, but of course, it's a broader conversation than that. It has a broader impact than just this one discrete process that we're speaking of. So can you just share how at IBM you guys think about what is the connection between getting this right, doing this better, improving how we manage performance? What is the connection to that with things like culture and retention that, are maybe some of the broader people things that you guys care about?
I mean, it certainly connects to all of those things, right? When you think about the culture of performance, it's all encompassing. It's about personal growth, internal mobility. It's about recognition and development. And it is about, having to potentially take steps to help somebody improve or coach them out of the business if it's truly necessary. But by having those really candid conversations, it's more often something that is coaching and personally meaningful, helping somebody to see that end result versus something that feels so negative. That focus on mobility for us, that focus on feedback is all about driving engagement and retention, because we want IBMers to see and to understand the opportunities that exist. When you work at a company the size of IBM, you've got that luxury of opportunity that you can really reinvent and reimagine your career over the course of, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. We have some really fantastic legacy IBMers that have continued to reinvent their career. And for us, we've also really put that focus on skills, and that's been a big underpinning. The idea of skills-based hiring for us has really transformed how we find candidates and how we've really opened the aperture to our recruiting. It takes away that requirement that you need a degree as a barrier to entry, and it refocuses on learning and personal growth. So internally, we have challenged IBMers to do at least 40 hours of learning a year. And in 2020, the average IBMer did 88 hours of learning. We've enabled that through fantastic digital learning platforms. It's sort of like the Netflix of learning. You get recommendations based on what others are learning about, what might be relevant to your job role. And then from a hiring perspective, we've really thought about the programs that can help people come back to work. So when we talk about the impact of the pandemic, right, technology is transforming. The pandemic has accelerated many of those technological changes even more, but it has also widened the gap for people who may not have employment currently. And so when you think about skills as that sort of currency, that thread that runs through it, programs like our apprenticeship program, our returnship program, all of these are now helping to bring people back to work, looking more at the skills and the capabilities that they have, that growth mindset that they bring, that they will continue to have over the course of their career as a pathway back into employment and no longer a barrier just because they maybe didn't have a degree that they had previously earned.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for making that connection for us. And so, Delita, similar question. Some people might not be sure what the connection is to performance management and equity and inclusion. Can you share how that, how reshaping performance management can help on those lines?
Sure. We really view it all as part and parcel of the same thing. So Grove Collaborative is one of the leading sustainable consumer products organizations, companies out there. And our mission is about taking the ability of consumers to make choices that are more sustainable and healthy. And if you think about our mission as a company in that role, we really translate that to our employees as well. What are the things that we can do for our employees to make them better able to be good employees and to be great people and contributors, not only at Grove, but also in the larger world as well? And when we think about performance management and when we think about results within the company, we recognize and we understand that issues around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion are really important to bringing the ability of an employee to be their whole self and to be somebody whose energy and contribution can be sustained over the long term. So when we think about what it is that we want to bring into our culture and what it is that we believe will enable all employees to participate, to have a voice, to bring forward good ideas, to knock down ideas that aren't good, we recognize that we need to create avenues for them to be able to do that. So justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, what we call JEDI, is a really important thing for us to do. And I would say that for us, there was a lot of pressure after the George Floyd incident to do things that other companies do, like publish statistics, talk about how many people we have that are maybe different or other within our company. And I'll say, it was a broad discussion because I've been counted since I was 3 years old, and we're still having conversations 50 years later about why counting is something that we should be doing. And if it were the thing that we're going to move the needle, then we wouldn't still be counting. And as we think about performance reviews and as we thought about the whole program at Grove Collaborative, which is really about sustainability for the future, we wanted to bring forward ideas and themes that would be sustainable, not only for the business, but for our people as well. And that's what we really set out to do. So our programs have curriculums, our senior leadership team reads and has watched videos and leads conversations, and they have reports that they put out for the entire company to see around these issues around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Management training, all of that is very, very visible so everybody can see who's doing what. And it really does lead, we believe, to a situation that will enable us all to be better, not only at Grove, but also in the larger world that Grove exists. And Grove is absolutely a part of the world in terms of wanting to see a healthier environment for all of us.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for helping us draw that line. It can be a really important one for everyone to understand. So we're almost at the end of our time here, but I did want to just ask both of you guys one more question. If you had advice for your peers who are working in HR over people management on how to make this change, how to take their, some of them might still have this older version or some, existing, shoot off from that. What is your advice for peers working in HR on how they can really tactically make this change possible within their organizations? Kelly, we'll start with you.
I'd say probably two pieces of advice. I know you only asked for one. First would be to really talk to and listen to your employees. Co-create with them. Give them the space to share what performance means to them, how they want to have conversations, how they want to approach feedback. Don't necessarily make it feel like such an HR initiative. Make it feel like something that is being developed by the entire company, because that's really what's going to give you the adoption. But second, I would also say really think about the objectives you're trying to reach with your redesign, right? Is it about company growth? Is it about building relationships? What do you want to achieve? And ensure that you're infusing that into anything that you approach with a redesign for performance.
And Delita, how about you?
Right. I agree with Kelly on the piece with co-creating with employees. That is very, very important. We get so much of the information about what's critical from those conversations with employees that are made easier because we've helped people learn how to have feedback conversations with all of us and give us that kind of feedback. I would say that the other piece of advice, though, that is really important is don't be beholden to your tools and to the systems that are already in place. There is so much creativity that's out there, and there are so many ways that we can accomplish the objectives that we need, and we don't always have to have the tools in place to do it. That can come later, but we can experiment and we can learn how to do things. We can learn our way into the best result, and it doesn't have to be perfect and gorgeous, but it will get there over time. So don't be afraid to throw out the old tools and the old way of thinking and get a little bit creative. It'll get you, I think, really far, and it'll enable you to move quickly.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. I think we've learned a lot today about how and why performance management is important, how it ties to key company initiatives such as culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, and retention. So thank you both so much for taking out the time. Caroline, back to you.
Thank you, Aman. And thank you, Delita and Kelly. Performance management is truly so important for keeping workers engaged. For our next panel, HR technology plays a key role in making sure workers have access to everything from their benefits to payroll. Over the last year, we've seen how critical it is to provide tools to make work easier for employees. Aman will welcome leaders from Paycom and the New England Patriots to discuss how HR teams can use technology to shape the employee experience. Back to you, Aman.
Thanks, Caroline. Hello, everyone. My name is Aman Kidwai. I'm a workplace reporter at Insider. Over the course of the pandemic, we've learned just how important it is for companies to take care of their people. As a result, business leaders have a new set of responsibilities when it comes to shaping the employee experience. They're expanding benefits, allowing more flexibility in scheduling, and being more comfortable with remote work. I'm joined by Holly Farrow, Chief Sales Officer at Paycom. Holly's here to share her expertise on the importance of user-friendly technology at work. And we've also got Miranda Blakelock from the Kraft Group. Miranda has a bunch of great ideas for how HR can adapt to this new era and new set of responsibilities. Holly, Miranda, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'll start with you, Miranda. How has your perception of a company's responsibility for the employee experience, how has your perception of that changed over the past 12 to 14 months?
We've really seen a change in how employees are expecting to do their work, and also how we treat our employees, to think about it's more than just a job to them. This is really a blend between their personal life and their work life. And how do we make things easier for them so that way when they're at work, they can focus on the work, and when they're at home and working with their loved ones and having fun on the weekends or in the evenings, it's really more about their time and trying to maximize that balance between the two.
In your experience, where does technology play into that? And with the impetus to use a number of different kinds of new technologies to help us in the workplace, how do you also overcome the potential of technology fatigue?
And that's a real problem, right? As we've learned with people working from home, they're not ever turning their technology off. And so the blur between working 9 to 5 has really changed in this new model. So what we've really tried to make sure is that employees have easy access to technology. For instance, with utilizing our Paycom as our HRIS system, employees can put in their PTO request on their phone. It's just like a consumer technology. So they can ask for PTO, they can put in their tax information, they can look at their schedules just at the push of a button. And so that way it's easy, simple, one step at a time. And so they're not multiple levels of them having to go in and do the work that they used to have to do in person with our HR partners.
And Holly, we've seen so much change about the kind of digital channels with which employees are working in and communicating. How are you seeing people adapt their overall strategy in that front in terms of managing a digital experience that employees are having?
Miranda kind of mentioned it before, but I think over the last, 12 to 16 months that employees had an increased amount of interaction with consumer technology, right? We were utilizing apps more than ever last year. And a lot of that because we were home and we couldn't even leave. So that was the only way for us to make things happen. With that, employees are coming back into the workplace now with that same type of expectation. So they want to have the same type of experience that they've had with Amazon or maybe their local pizza place. That's something that companies need to realize. And there's a very, very low tolerance of complexity for employees. I think of myself, if I log onto an app and it takes me more than a few seconds to understand how it works or what I need to do, I'm probably going to log off and go and download another app. Employees, they don't necessarily have that option because the companies are the ones that are investing in the technology. So companies have to invest in technology with the employee in mind. If an employee doesn't see the ease of the technology, if it's not easy to find, if it's not easy to log in, they are going to go back to their manual ways. And for the organization, that's devastating for them because they've invested thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars into technology that they can't get their full return of investment. So as companies are choosing technology, they really have to make sure that it fits the employee first on that side, because that's how they're going to see the benefits long term for the organization.
And Miranda, to go a little bit deeper into that, in addition to, of course, providing new technology and new systems, we also have to take care of the people, right? We have needs and families and everything else going on in the world. And I think over the past, 12, 14 months again, we've seen kind of a greater responsibility for employers to really help people more holistically. How have you guys gone about approaching that? And what does that look like for you guys?
Well, Mon, it's a great question. So we've really taken to using a tool within Paycom so that all of our data would be integrated to really survey employees. So not just your typical engagement survey every year, but starting to think about how we can meet them at their needs, at their timing. So we survey all of our new hires every week. We survey our employees after a game day. After the Revolution wins a game, we survey them to see how they can improve that experience when they are coming to work. So we're really trying to focus on the employee experience and engaging them so that way we can continue to improve their experience versus just looking at the numbers of how many people were on staff that day and how did that work out. So we're really trying to take a more employee-centric approach in order to kind of drive our business goals and really start to form our business strategy around our human capital needs.
And what does that look like? What have been some of the kind of new policies you've had to implement in order to make that happen?
So it's been pretty far reaching. So whether that's looking at different ways of scheduling our employees, we've accommodated that. As people have worked differently over the past 12 to 14 months, whether it's been work from home, which has not been our standard before this, or working from the office, but trying to think about space differently. For instance, when we have a game, our employees that are coming in used to come through thousands of employees in just a few moments to try and clock in. And they were all standing around a whole bunch of time clocks, trying to punch in like the old days, making sure that they were on site. With that, and with our manufacturing group who've had to work during the pandemic, we've had to think about things differently and think about safety and COVID. And so we've actually turned on an app within Paycom so that we can geofence. So as soon as they're within the footprint of the building, they can clock in, and thinking about their safety versus just the normal mechanics of human resources issues like timekeeping and payroll issues.
Holly, from your perspective, you're working with so many HR leaders and working with them through this very fast moving, very fast changing times. What have you seen from this group of your clients in terms of how their usage of your platform has changed over the past year in order to kind of meet these new needs?
Well, one thing that we definitely realize is how much our clients care about their employees and how they see the connection to happy employees and healthy organizations. So it's really been amazing going through this experience and kind of holding people's hands and learning from them. Someone like Miranda that's done all of these incredible things over the last few months. It's really been incredible watching them go and make these changes that are best for the employee. When it comes to just the technology that they're doing, I think companies care so much, but the one thing that they need is they need time to come up with these strategies and think through. We went through something that has never been done before in HR organizations. There wasn't a playbook like they have for the Patriots, right? There wasn't this playbook that Miranda could flip open and say, hey, this is what we do in this situation. So they needed time to be able to sit down on Zoom with each other, think about how are we going to continue operating as a business, but how are we going to protect our number one asset? So with Paycom's system, what we're able to give our organizations is time. The time that they would have spent updating addresses and making changes to time and attendance punches and updating PTO in the system, they're actually able to have the employee take ownership of those changes within the system. And they were able to use that time to come with the real strategies that made a difference with organizations. So in terms of our DDX with Paycom, the direct data exchange, the usage has never been been higher. And it really did start taking off when we went from work from home, because it was no longer an option. It was no longer a best practice. It was the only practice that you could actually use in order to spend that time. So we were just very, very grateful that we were able to help companies like the Kraft Group during that period of time, and to see what they were able to do was just incredible. It makes, the job so fulfilling on our side to be able to partner with executives like that.
The direct data exchange has really been a game changer for us. So, like Holly mentioned, we didn't have an HR playbook for how to deal with a pandemic. But as we've gone along over this past year, we've been monitoring our direct data exchange score, which is basically how is our HRIS system performing? Are we optimizing it? So each month we look at it. I actually look at it first thing each day. So if we see employees are doing more manual work, we can actually create a team, problem solve, and really take a Lean Six Sigma approach to try and improve that employee experience so that we're managing it in the moment. And then we can see the results the next month as we see our exchange rate go up. The DDX score goes up to show that employees are doing more of those things themselves, and it's an easier process for them. And so we see the manual work from HR decrease, which is good because as we are all experiencing, it's always a challenge to do even more work during these times with less people on site. So it's really been a great tool for us. So it's become our kind of HR playbook, and it is a little bit like a game. So just after each month, we just take it just like the Patriots just won a game, but we go and look at our game film and the DDX score and see how we could do it better next month. So it's been a great tool for us. And from a process improvement standpoint, it's really been a game changer.
That's so interesting. And yeah, Holly, I heard that Miranda is a bit of a superstar within the Paycom organization. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, we love working with Miranda. I mean, it's obvious just meeting with her today, everyone on this call, you're going to see her love and her passion for the people that she works with. And not only that love and that passion, but just the strategy behind it. She's constantly thinking about what can she do from an employee's perspective, but also for the business. And that's what you want, right? You want someone that's looking out for both sides there. And she does that. And like she said before, she's utilizing the information that Paycom is putting in front of her, but she doesn't stop there. She takes that information, she digs into it, she sees the detail of, did we have a manager go in and make a change on an employee's behalf? Maybe they were doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They wanted to go in and they wanted to make the employee's life easier, but that's taking away from the game plan that they have for the Kraft Group, right? They want to get the managers back there doing the work and the employees back in there doing the work that they should be doing. So we just truly appreciate her. She's constantly pushing on different sides, and we hope that we're making her organization better, but her feedback to us is definitely making Paycom better. So we appreciate you.
You guys are going to make me blush.
No, I think it's important. It's important to have that, like you said, the two-way feedback to be able to kind of on both sides, be able to share different best practices or ideas for improving things. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the organizational stakeholders, Miranda, that you have on the HR team. Of course, you care first and foremost about the employees and the employee experience, but there are some other people in the company you have to work with to make that happen. And kind of sticking with the theme here, one of those, because of the technology, is IT. And so I was wondering, how has your relationship with IT counterparts changed or improved? And even to what extent is maybe this new technology need reflected on the people even within the HR department?
That's a great question. So we are very fortunate here at the Kraft Group to have just the gold star of IT teams. So we work with them quite closely. They're really an extension of us, just like our vendor partners like Paycom are, where the right hand and the left hand, and HR is usually right in the middle to try and make sure that everything is connecting and working together. So we're very fortunate to have such a strong relationship. But what we've seen during the past 12 to 14 months is that it's not just the technology, but you also are having to tell the story out of it. And so we're fortunate in that having a single solution for us with Paycom, we're able to pull that data out and start to really get into some in-depth analysis. And that goes back to kind of our frontline leaders as well. And so we're able to really maximize our role as HR, and we've really kind of transformed that HR role to be much more data centric and really strong business partners. And so our HR colleagues, which I'm fortunate to have the best HR team around, are all really strong at looking at data and starting to tell that story. And that's really become a change for HR, I think, just not here, but it's going to be everywhere, so that we're speaking the same language as our business leaders, so that we can help influence those decisions and really start building our strategy for business growth with the human capital strategy along with that. And that's really the HR role kind of being redefined as we go.
And Holly, to you, kind of similar question, but just, again, from your perspective, seeing so many different companies implement your systems, how do you coach them through working with their technology partners and making sure that implementation goes smoothly?
Well, we are very, very blessed on our side to have such an incredible implementation process. Miranda talked about a team approach from her side, but that's honestly what we do from the Paycom's perspective. We know that a lot of our clients have only been through one or maybe two transitions in their career. At Paycom, we're going through one or two transitions every second. So we've been able to build upon that knowledge, coming in with best practices, really being able to lead from an implementation side and understanding the responsibilities of each person. There are a lot of principles within each implementation. Which areas are they focused on? What matters the most to them? So we really try to work with them. We spend a lot of time together during the beginning of the process, understanding everyone's needs and what they're ultimately trying to accomplish. And that's what we're there for, right? We're there to make the crafts group's visions come alive with our technology and our resources on the back end. So that's really how we end up working with everyone. And it's just making sure everyone understands that their role, their responsibility, it matters. If we're truly going to help elevate the employees, everyone has to come together and everyone has to understand what are those key metrics that we have to hit. We've seen clients in the past who have come in and they're excited about being employee centric, right? They're excited about giving power back to an employee, giving them ownership. But when it comes to the implementation, sometimes they might lean back towards some of the old processes of managing it. And sometimes you just need us there telling you it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Another group that we need to work with in the interest of improving employee experience is the folks in finance, right? The people in charge of the purse strings. This could also be line of business leaders. How do you work with them to make that financial case for investment of time, money, other resources in order to improve or make changes to the employee experience? We'll start with Miranda for that.
I was going to say, this is right up my alley. So we have a strong relationship with our finance team as well. And I think that most HR teams really have to straddle that line of being both the employee advocate, but also wearing a business hat. And I think the challenge with that is being able to speak the same language. And so part of that is being able to have the data to support why you're making your human capital strategy and go to your finance team and your business leaders to say, here's what the data shows us. So that way you're not taking an emotional approach, because business leaders and finance in particular speak in terms of data and dollars. And so you're really coming to them in their language to say, here's what I was able to find out. So if we show that if we adjust our schedules by this amount, we actually will have a greater satisfaction rate, but we also will be able to see this much in savings from overtime because we'll have less employees call out. And so we're really having to think creatively about how do we analyze the data coming out of the system, because human capital data is one of the biggest fields right now there is. But then how do you translate that story back to our business leaders and make it easy and actionable for them? So it's not just data analytics, but you're starting to look at predictive and prescriptive analytics. And that's really the future of HR, I believe, to start to say very specifically, if we take this action based off of the information that we currently have, we can expect to see this result. And that's just like we see on the manufacturing line. So if we have a computer screen monitoring how many boxes we're putting out at one of our great factories, we're able to also see that from the human resources side to start to manage that human capital better. So that way we can focus on doing the things that we really enjoy, which is engaging the employees and helping give them the workplace that they want and deserve.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. I know it can be really tough for people sometimes to make that case. So good inside intel there. We've got about a minute left, and so just wanted to run a quick lightning round by you guys. If you had just kind of one takeaway or idea on improving employee experience that you'd want to share with peers or other folks in charge of people, and you wanted to share that really quickly, what would that be?
I'll start, Holly. So mine would be make it easy. The last thing we want is employees to be having to struggle with the processes and policies that HR puts in place. We want us to be kind of the friendly face that's making their lives better when they're at work. So being able to request PTO in a few seconds on their phone makes their life better.
I love that. Well, for me, I would tell you to look at the technology through the employee's lens. And what I mean by that is actually sit down and look how employees are utilizing the technology each and every day. If you don't know, ask, bring them in. We actually take a lot of our clients through an employee experience meeting where we go through the lens of the employee. And that's where you're going to see the opportunity and you're going to see what they see on their side. Make it easy, lower the complexity, and you're going to see a huge return on that investment.
Excellent. Well, Holly, Miranda, thank you so much for your time and your insight. I think we learned a lot about staying agile, keeping up with employee needs, and doing what we can to improve the employee experience, especially as things get more challenging. So thank you both so much for the time and the insight. Back to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Aman, and thank you so much, Miranda and Holly. Before we jump to our next panel, I want to take a moment to remind our audience of the official event hashtag #InsiderEvents. And please take our survey at any time during the event by clicking at the icon at the bottom of the page. One of the biggest challenges employers had to face during the pandemic was recruiting talent. Many companies had to adjust lengthy interview processes to be done completely virtually. During our next panel, moderated by Insider strategy correspondent Shauna Lebowitz, our guests will take a closer look at the ins and outs of virtual talent acquisition. Over to you, Shauna.
Thanks, Caroline, and welcome. I'm Shauna Lebowitz-Gaynor. I'm a correspondent at Insider, and I'm here today with Lynn Oldham and Liz Wessel, who are forging a new path in terms of virtual talent acquisition. Lynn is the Chief People Officer at Zoom, and she and her team have been hiring up to 200 people every month for the past year to meet skyrocketing demand. Lynn was also named to Insider's list of the most innovative HR leaders today. Liz is the co-founder and CEO of WayUp, where she helps early career professionals find jobs they love. We feature Liz and her career advice all the time on Insider because she's incredibly savvy about what employers are looking for and the best ways to stand out. So I am thrilled to be here with Lynn and with Liz to hear about how virtual hiring and virtual recruiting can help us find better talent and more diverse talent. So Lynn and Liz, thank you for being here today. Liz, I want to start with you. You have said before something really interesting. You said you can't just stick the word remote on your hiring process and expect it to work. Can you tell us why not?
Absolutely. At the end of the day, I think a lot of people throughout the pandemic had tried to stick the word remote on whatever practice they were doing. And they said, we could do the same thing, but over Zoom, and think that everything would work out, perfectly, or as perfectly as it was in the real world. And I do believe that most people saw in the last year, that's just not the case. For example, when you are thinking about interviewing someone, if they come to your office, maybe you take them around your office and you get to chit chat a little bit with them, learn about their morning, maybe what they're doing this weekend, whatever it might be. And you build that camaraderie right then and there. And then you go to sit for an interview and you begin. In a remote world, putting the word remote on that just kind of removes all of that first camaraderie building. And all of a sudden you go right to the interview and you lose every aspect of that kind of informal get to know you. And so I think at the end of the day, a lot of companies have started to realize we need to purposefully change how we do what we do, not just try to bring it to Zoom, but instead say, let's bring it to Zoom or whatever your virtual conferencing is. Let's bring it online. However, let's really think about what needs to change in this virtual world and what can stay the same. And just in that example alone, the camaraderie building, you can't bring someone around your office, so you need to be much more purposeful about that.
I also want to talk about logistics. And Lynn, I think you'll have a good perspective on this. Is it possible for your entire hiring and recruiting process to be remote, even if you're hiring, say, a senior executive for your company?
I think Liz and you, Sean, are absolutely right. Intentionality is important, and even with senior hires, right? So yes, it is possible to be 100% remote, and in fact, we are. And I think the important part about getting the candidate ready, whether they're a junior candidate or senior candidate, is that you're giving them all of the information about what the interview process is going to be like. You think about that walk around the office. A lot of that was the person describing the process for the day. So you have to intentionally do that up front. And then make sure that the person is understanding who they're going to meet, when they're going to meet them. It's really all about the setup. The other thing is around the senior part. When I was interviewing for Zoom, I had some online and some over Zoom and some in person. And then I met the CEO, was one of my final interviews, and it was on Zoom. And it was great. We had a great time together. But when it came to deciding whether I was going to join the company, I had a second thought. Because I really did, for my role, that relationship is very, very key. So it was important for me to really know him, and I wasn't sure I really did. I ended up flying up for the day and having a meal with Eric, and it was really great. But I do think that is something that we have to tackle with kid gloves and make sure that we're doing that part right, because it is important as we look at every hire, but especially the people that are going to lead the company forward.
That makes a lot of sense, Lynn. So going forward at Zoom, would you say that most of the more senior leaders are having some portion of their hiring process in person, at least one meeting?
At this point, we've stayed strong on 100% remote, and it's been more difficult. I would say, if anything, Shauna, we've made up for that in more interviews, which I know is just elongates the process, but it also gives the person a chance to really see inside the company, the candidate, but for us to have a longer time and more people to have a conversation with those candidates. I would say that's what our substitute for now. Maybe with the world opening up a little more, we'll change that up and add a coffee.
Well, that does make a lot of sense given what's going on. And thanks for giving us that little glimpse into the way hiring and recruiting works at Zoom. One critical piece of this that I really want to touch on and get both of your insights on is the way virtual talent acquisition, how it's linked to diversity within an organization. Liz, I'll start with you because I know you worked with many organizations on their hiring processes for years, and I imagine you've seen the way diversity is at an organization. What have you seen? What has that relationship been in your experience?
This is all I do all day, every day. This is all I think about at work. So I'm so excited to talk about this because I think it's something few companies realized prior to the pandemic, and most companies, at least larger companies, have come to understand and agree with. So stepping back, companies have been recruiting remotely well before the pandemic. I live way up. We live in the early career recruitment world. And kind of the 1990s version of that is go on campus, go to career fairs, hand out flyers, and hope you meet some great people. But a lot of companies many years ago realized Black and Hispanic candidates, as an example, are less likely to go to career fairs than white and Asian candidates. And so if you have D&I goals where you're focused on getting more, for example, people of color, more Black and Hispanic candidates specifically, going to a career fair is not only going to limit you by how many people you can meet because you're only, meeting the people in front of you, but you're also being kind of limited to people who have the time to go to that career fair. They're probably less likely to be working part-time hours and so on. So companies have been doing virtual for a long time. And when we look across our thousands of companies that use Way Up to hire virtually, because we're a virtual platform, the companies that have had the highest D&I numbers and results over the last 7 years since we started our business have had one thing in common, which is that they have made more hires through virtual means than through in-person means. And so if you think about how you are, going virtual, you are enabling people to be a little bit more on their own schedule, not have to take off hours from class, from their own job, whatever it might be. Some people can't take off that time, especially when you look at socioeconomic status differences. You're really affecting one group more so than another. And so I can't recommend it enough. If you want D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, to be a core part of your talent acquisition strategy, focusing more on your virtual strategy than your in-person strategy will do you wonders.
That is fascinating. And I'm so glad you shared that snippet from your experience. And I wonder, Liz, to stick with you for a second, no pressure to name any clients, but if you could give us a little more specific details into a WayUp client who has been hiring virtually and found that this was a path to greater diversity and inclusion.
We have a lot. I would say one that kind of comes to mind immediately. Actually, I'll give you two because very different industries. Unilever in the CPG industry and then BlackRock in the finance industry. Both companies that have said, let's not focus only on these 10 schools. I want to recruit the best, most diverse talent, whether for entry level, whether for mid level. And so let's focus on just recruiting, and I'm only speaking to the entry level space. Let's focus on recruiting the best and most diverse and qualified talent versus where you happen to get into school and what you happen to score on your SATs when you were in high school that then led to you getting into that college. Those are two of many, many, many examples of great companies that have been, investing more in virtual historically and really focusing on virtual candidates and not just those they meet in person.
Lynn, how has it been for you and your team at Zoom? Have you found that anything's shifted in terms of the way you're looking at and seeing diversity and inclusion when you really took that hiring and recruiting process fully remote?
I think the pandemic was the forcing factor, right? And when we got there, it was really like the light bulbs went off. Before the pandemic, we were looking at different cities to go to start a new location to ensure diversity in our candidates, right? But the pandemic really put us in a position of saying, well, we could hire anywhere. It doesn't matter anymore. Geography was actually a limiting factor to diversity, right? Because if you think about San Francisco alone, San Francisco, I believe, is around 5% Black in a population, a global, U.S. population of 13%. So if you're searching in San Francisco proper, you're automatically not going to be equal to the U.S. population. So it was really important to ensure that we were doing it right. And I think same thing I would say that Liz was saying, we did the same with our university recruits this year and have opened that up wide. And it's just amazing to see what the incoming class looks like. And I'm very excited about what that's doing for the organization. The other side of that is obviously inclusion and living like we live in terms of working from home. We find that is also a better scored thing on employee surveys because people feel like they're not on a floor and they're the only, right? They're actually part of a class with a bunch of people. We may not be sitting in the same place, but we can see each other on a screen of 24, et cetera.
When it comes to inclusion, a lot of large companies have already embraced this, and I think smaller companies are starting to figure it out. You can't also assume that every employee you hire is going to have perfect internet bandwidth, is going to have a beautiful background. I'm actually not at my own house this month, so forgive my beach background, but you look at Lynn's background, it's beautiful. Not everyone has that, and so also talking to employees about what can I provide you with? Do you need help with an internet stipend? Do you have a good camera for your computer? Do you need us to send you that webcam? Whatever it might be. If you really want to create a more inclusive environment, especially being more understanding of there might be little kids running around in the background, and is that okay? And if it's not okay, how do you work with them to figure it out? But I do think that, from an inclusion perspective, keeping in mind that not everyone has the same, financial means to have a perfect Zoom setup every day.
No, that's great. That's great, Liz. We absolutely practice that as well, but I'm glad you brought that up.
I do think it's interesting. And, Lynn at Zoom says she's doing it. Are most employers doing that, Liz?
I think large companies, absolutely. It took some a little bit of time at the beginning of the pandemic, which is totally understandable. But I have seen mid-size companies, mid-market companies, smaller companies not necessarily always get there. And then, there is a real struggle of how do you handle, you don't want necessarily someone in sales having a kid screaming and running around in the background, but they also might not be able to afford daycare, whatever it might be. So how you rectify that, I don't know that there's a right answer, but I do think larger companies have been investing, but I do think smaller companies are still struggling there.
It's an interesting disparity and an interesting observation. I do want to get into some of the mistakes that companies make, the common ones they make when they first start shifting to the virtual hiring and recruiting processes. Lynn, I would love to start with you. Can you tell us any mistakes Zoom made, and Zoom, of course, being a very tech-savvy company, but any mistakes you and your team made, and what do you learn from that?
I read Glassdoor weekly when I get my recap, and I see all the mistakes we make. So I definitely know we make mistakes. We are not perfect. I think what we are doing to correct the mistakes is ramping up our touch. The candidate pool out there has a lot of choice, with openings on the rise, companies really reopening and trying to get their workforce reinvigorated. They're all hiring. So there's a lot of choice. And employers have to make sure that they're not ghosting candidates. You've got to be in there. You've got to be talking to them. You've got to be making sure that they're engaged, because we're in a virtual interviewing process. As Liz said, it's easier for candidates to take interviews throughout their day, right? So if that's the case, then you know that they've got multiple things going on. So it's really important. High touch, high candidate care, I think is where we're headed, and we've got to, because otherwise you're going to lose out to other companies.
So by high touch, Lynn, you mean staying in touch with the candidate?
Yes, close communication, even after you're hired. You've made offer, they've accepted. Don't stop, because ultimately there might be things still going on, and you want to make sure that candidate stays engaged. I had a candidate go right up until 2 weeks before start and give me a call and say, no, they're not coming. So I think that taught me the lesson of stay in touch, stay in often and early, and don't stop until they're in the door.
Wow. So a candidate basically almost ghosted you, and that taught you and your team, Lynn, that you've really got to forge that connection and keep it up. So that's fascinating. Liz, have you seen among the companies you work with and you advise, like any traps that they're consistently falling into?
Two that come to mind the most. One, Lynn absolutely kind of got to the big problem, but to take it another step, a lot of companies are not realizing that today. I can interview with 6 companies if I want to, because I'm not traveling to each office. I'm just doing, maybe 30-minute breaks in between my Zoom calls. And so 6 interviews in one day means that I'm probably going to also get more job offers. And so really taking into account that building that relationship, Lynn mentioned, keeping that relationship after the offer. And I agree, so many companies are falling flat on that, but building that relationship throughout the interview process so purposefully, even if you have to have one of the interviews just be a get to know you and see if this person and you, jive, whatever it might be. But that is so incredibly crucial. And then the second one is really interesting. So a lot of companies invested so much money in fancy office tours, right? I'm going to film my office. I'm going to take pictures with a professional wedding photographer of my office, who knows what, but people were investing a lot. There were even companies that were built just to take pictures of your office. The issue is that a lot of companies are moving to either be fully or partially remote. And I am not seeing most companies take that same level of care and thoughtfulness around framing that story of their culture, their remote culture, as I was around seeing how they showed the culture in their office. So really thinking through, if A+ of showing off your office is doing a beautiful video tour with testimonials and micro kitchen, Zooms and all that stuff, what can you do to show your remote culture? Whether it's a video, whether it's an article, whether it's pictures, whether it's a brochure. Companies are starting to get at this, and I've seen some companies, Apex Systems is one that comes to mind that has some really great videos online about their remote culture, where they show footage from different online bridal showers that they've held for employees and so on. It's really sweet what they're doing, and I'm not seeing as many companies invest in that. And it's not like you have to spend a lot of money. You record some Zoom calls, you put them together, you do photos, you make an article, whatever it might be.
I really like that point, that it's presumably easier or more common to show your in-office culture. But actually, now that we're all remote or hybrid or whatever form that your workplace might be taking, it's actually a good idea to showcase your remote or hybrid culture. And as you said, it's not that hard, Liz.
And by the way, companies have been so creative. Many companies have been so creative with how they've brought their culture to be fully remote or partially remote. So I think it actually is going to be way more fun for candidates to read about your remote culture than it was about how many, versions of hint water do you have in your micro kitchen. Just my opinion, though.
Well, that makes perfect sense. One thing that I know, or the thing pretty much every employer wants, is to keep their employees engaged and to keep them around, period. But do you think the employee experience or candidate experience during a virtual recruiting process has any bearing on whether and how long they stick around at your company?
I would say yes. And after hire is really the critical piece, and making sure that people feel like they've assimilated or engaged in the culture. I think the one thing we did during the pandemic was look at scrapping the entirety of the onboarding process as it was formally constructed, which was flying everybody into San Jose or Denver and keeping them for a week long and blah, 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 right? Now what we do is the first day we've revisited an immersion, but it's not an immersion on our product, although we use the product and we play with it and we annotate, but ultimately it's really about dipping people deep in the culture and what that means at Zoom to be a Zoomie. And essentially the first day they're emoting. They're talking about how they delivered happiness in their lives, whether that's personal or in another company, and feeling all of that come to life, because that's what we're all about at our core. And we want to make sure that people feel engaged with the core before we send them out into the wild.
That's a wonderful process. Liz, what do you think? What does that relationship look like, and how can we make sure that retention is positively influenced?
I think the biggest thing companies can do is ensuring that the people who accept your offer really want to work for you. And what I mean by that is things like exploding offers, where you say you have 48 hours to let us know. Who is that good for? Maybe you find out 2 days sooner than would have been ideal, but now you have a candidate who's being pressured to give you an answer in just 48 hours where they might have other things going on. And then you're either more likely to have someone who takes a job that they probably shouldn't have taken if they took their time to actually do their research, and then you're going to have them likely quit, or even worse, get fired. Or you have someone who might even renege their offer after they accept it, which is probably like every recruiter I know's worst nightmare. And it happens all the time. And so I would say giving the candidate time to think about truly whether they want the job, and giving them the resources they need. Hey, if you're on the fence about something, let me know what you're on the fence about. And I'd be happy to have an employee who either has been through a similar situation or has been in this role before talk to you about it. And it's not going to be a sell call. It's going to be a real, honest call. I saw a stat recently, I think from CNBC, 26% of white-collar workers in the United States today are saying that they plan to leave their job as soon as their lockdown is over. And that's really scary. And I think that's going to mean a lot of recruiters are going to be very, very, very busy. If staffing firms and RPOs were public, I would be investing right now, because they're going to have a lot of work ahead of them. And what I would tell you is that might put a lot of pressure on recruiting teams, and they might want to do those exploding offers to be more competitive and fill positions quicker. And I think it's going to really bite them in the butt in the long term if they do.
Well, thanks, Liz, and thanks, Lynn. And thanks to you all for tuning in. I know we all walked away with some great best practices today for virtual talent acquisition, and some common mistakes to avoid, like those exploding offers Liz just mentioned. I will see you all at the next panel and kick it back to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Shauna. And thank you, Liz and Lynn. What a fascinating conversation around rethinking the ways companies attract and retain talent. For our final session, we will discuss the power of analytics and how it enables leaders to ensure the right people are in the right roles. This data can help CHROs create diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces for all. This is a topic that Shauna has covered thoroughly, so I'll toss it over to her to introduce our speakers. Back to you, Shauna.
I'm here now with Dane Holmes and Vincent Chi. They're influential leaders in how people analytics can drive HR strategy.
Dane is the CEO, co-founder, and chair of HR tech startup Escalera. Before landing in Silicon Valley, he worked on Wall Street as head of human capital at Goldman Sachs. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Dane, and he is incredibly thoughtful about the best ways to strengthen workplaces through diversity, equity, and inclusion. Vincent is the director of people and culture at strategic communications consultancy Bevel. Vincent was also named to Insider's list of the most innovative HR leaders today. During the pandemic, Vincent helped Bevel grow 111%, and he's still working to expand the company. So I am so excited to sit down today with Dane and with Vincent and hear how HR data can drive performance at their organizations. So Dane and Vincent, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, great
Thanks
to
for
be
having
here.
us.
You're welcome. I think we should start by figuring out and explaining what exactly we mean when we talk about people analytics. Dane, I'll start with you. What comes to mind when we use the phrase people analytics?
Yeah, the way I tend to think about it is really through the lens of what are the three kind of core legs of the stool when you think about any organization. It's your customers, your people, and your shareholders. And so when I think about it through that lens, when everybody thinks about what customer analytics is, they're very straightforward about that. They say, okay, it's analyzing the data that allows me to understand my customer better, to be able to serve them better, create products that they want and services that they need. The same thing applies to people analytics. It's looking at data and information in order to better understand your employees, largely thinking about things like retention, productivity, innovation, culture building. And so really that's the way I'd look at it. It's adding the data and the analytics around how you think about people and how you therefore you approach your people strategy.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's the people or the employee analog to customer analytics, and that makes a lot of sense. Vincent, can you give us a recent example of how you've used people analytics at Bevel?
Yeah, I would say a recent example of when we use people analytics is just maybe like a day-to-day. It's really, we just had a bunch of new hires start within the pandemic. We were able to double in size. So the example is making sure that we're doing a 90-day check-in weekly. I actually speak weekly with our new hires to make sure that they have everything they need. So within small businesses, the real value is within retention and making sure that we set people up when they first start for success.
So you both make a really strong case for what people analytics is, why it's important, but it is, of course, still in a pretty nascent phase. And Dane, I'd love to hear from you on this. Where do you think people analytics is headed in the next few years?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you that I think it's the very early stages of people analytics. And I would think about this in a lot of ways. One of the corollaries might be how you thought about chief marketing officers' roles and how they evolved over time. From being more kind of what I would say anecdote or conceptual driven to more data driven. I expect the same thing to happen to CHROs. That journey that I think most companies will be on will start as follows. At first, the people analytics team will help them understand the kind of diagnostic score of what do I need to focus on, what is core. The second part of it will then move to, okay, why, the why answer, which is always the important thing. I know where to focus, but now the thing I'm focused on, why is it happening? And then it will ultimately evolve to what I would call kind of test and learn. If I do certain things, can I get certain impacts to it? And so that's the, how do I address that why thing that's happening? And then ultimately it evolves into being able to project and predict what's going to happen. If I do X, I should expect Y outcome. So like any sort of analytical process, it'll move along that chain, that evolution, that progression from diagnosing to then explaining why it's happening, to then helping you understand how to respond, and ultimately being able to project expectations based on the data.
I see what you're saying, that depending on the stage that a particular organization is at, people analytics can provide a very different value, and there's a different use case depending on where they are and what type of organization they are. Vincent, I'll turn it over to you because I know Bevel is still a relatively small firm, and as we mentioned earlier, you've been ramping up hiring a lot, and I wonder if you can explain the specific
use case of people analytics in terms of hiring and recruiting?
Yeah, so for uh, sorry, could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. It was a little confusing. I wanted to know how people analytics is helping you with hiring, and then once you've hired people, like getting them into the right roles.
Yeah, that's really important, especially just making sure that people are in the right roles and that people are happy. For smaller boutique firms or smaller startups and businesses, it's really just for us, the value really comes from the retention. So making sure that people are providing the feedback regularly, and it really starts with like the different check-ins, the bi-monthly, the bi-weeklies. We've really built a sense of trust in terms of like the feedback that's being shared, and then how it affects the organization and how quickly we can affect the organization. Especially in smaller firms, it's a lot easier to do so. So making sure that they have, and we're deliberate about these conversations to push forward change.
Right. And I like that you use the word deliberate, and in terms of thinking about how people analytics can be part of that deliberate strategy of gathering employee feedback and directing your organizational or business strategy based on that. And I want to look to Dane for this next question, because I know that at Escalera you work with a bunch of different organizations and a range of organizations on people analytics. And I wonder if you can give us some examples, again with or without naming clients, of how it's worked for one or two of these organizations that are your clients.
Yeah, the way I tend to think about it is it can be used in a variety of ways. It's pretty limitless if you think about it. Technology as a tool, and analytics being the data core of that tool. It can be applied pretty broadly. We've seen it a bunch of ways. We have one solution that we use that's mentorship matching. It allowed us to do 1,000 mentor matches in about 45 days. If you think about that, the value of that is on two fronts. There's the core pain point of doing it. So literally, the customer would have said, hey, normally that would have taken us 4 or 5 years to be able to do. So there's just the pure speed of the delivery at it. But what was interesting going to the analytics part of it was that in creating this intentional matching of peer groups, what we were also able to say is put back data that said, by the way, this is what people want to be mentored on. Here's what people feel comfortable mentoring. Here's how they like to receive their mentoring. So all these insights into what their core people wore that had a much, much broader expansion and insight to the organization than just the core thing of matching people. It actually added that whole insight that was then going to inform their learning strategy, then help them think about workforce readiness, help them think about what roles they needed, because maybe there's a skills gap that exists in the organization that came through the data. So once again, data is at the core of all of this. It helps you understand what's going on. So even in one of our more straightforward solutions of mentorship matching, it's been designed in a way to provide you with the data to understand that insight that creates that virtuous circle of testing and learning, which is a core part of any sort of data analysis you have.
That's fascinating. All those insights that you can glean just from collecting, or not just, but from collecting data. And I do want to stick with you, Dane, and we touched on this just a bit earlier in our conversation, but at the point where business leaders are coming to you and coming to Escalera for to work with you, they certainly get the importance of people analytics. But across the board, do you think that most leaders and most organizations get the importance of HR data?
Yeah, I think it's emerging. I don't think they have it yet because in classic case, sometimes the importance of something always comes after the use case has been proven. And since we're in the early stages of this, data set on the use cases isn't as evolved. But I would say that that's true of every analytics that kind of emerges onto the scene. There's a time where people would say, hey, I don't need analytics around how I serve my customers. I just need to pack my briefcase, get in the car, and go spend time with them. That's what I need to do. That's the way. Nobody would say that today. And so I think the use cases of the value will, accrue over time. It's normal that you tend to see these things following the traditional pattern in HR, which is people focus first on recruitment. That's a normal area that people go to. But we're seeing it all across, and I think the data can be valuable for all of it. That entire employee experience from candidate to alumni, that whole period is a data-rich period. And in many cases, at many organizations, the largest data set they have is actually their employee data set, but they're not actually leveraging it to advance the strategic goals of the company. And so I think it's just a huge open playing field that exists for companies to take advantage of, but it'll come by, as it does in always, by a couple of very targeted use cases that apply to companies that they then build off of.
So there's a lot of potential that's yet to be tapped, it sounds like. I am interested to hear Vincent's perspective on this next topic, because when we last spoke, Vincent said something to the effect of he is, quote unquote, the data champion at Bevel, because again, it's not a huge company. They don't have a whole HR data team, and right now it's just Vincent being the champion. So can you tell us, Vincent, a little bit about how it works when you don't have all this fancy tech and fancy algorithms, so to speak? How have you been doing this on your own?
Yeah, of course. In-house, we create surveys, or I create surveys, really thoughtful in terms of, where we can sort of add the human touch and sort of like what questions we're sort of looking to uncover from our employees. And so being able to create these surveys, we've been able to, with this team, they've been able to, 100% participation, although it's, not mandatory. So understanding that from that perspective, and then also following up with a little bit more intimate conversations about what they mean, what they're looking for, and then also being able to shift around from that feedback. So definitely with a boutique firm, being able to that we're growing exponentially, data analytics, people analytics is going to be more and more important for us. But right now it's a little bit more manual, and I work hand in hand with our finance director of finance to make sure that we have everything tracked manually.
Well, that's terrific, and both that employee surveys are sort of influencing or even determining the course of your business strategy, and that you work so closely with your finance head to very literally influence where the money is going, and make sure that's in line with what your employees want and need. So I think I'll turn it to Dane here, because we heard a little from Vincent about the importance of being a person in data analytics and not just a machine or a computer. Dane, I wonder whether you think you can entirely automate the processes that go into people analytics, and if not, where exactly does human judgment come in?
Yeah, my personal view is I think there's always needs to be human judgment involved. And I actually, if you don't mind, Sean, I'm going to turn that question around to a different way. And this is the way I push people to think about it. Instead of thinking about what you can automate, what I would think about it more from the lens is think of potentially the tragedy and the damage that you're doing by not being informed by data. So we live in a world that often very important decisions that impact people's lives, impact companies' cultures, impact their success are being made without data. And so what I say to people is let's think about, hey, what can I totally automate away? Although that is one very good use of technology. How I tend to think about it is you're making these very, very important decisions. It could be the leader of a next business. It could be a hire. It could be this, do you have the right team assembled to do an innovation exercise? But you are making those decisions at a lot of companies right now with absolutely no data about what success looks like in that effort. And so the way I think about it is it's a tool like any other tool. It is not meant to replace judgment, but it is meant to both identify issues and inform around it. And so I think as an informational tool, super, super valuable in that. And that's the way that it should be core levered. There are, of course, things like scaling, like I gave the example of mentor matching. there's some of these things that technology can do faster than a human being can. It's not really a judgment issue. It's just like matching. It's much faster than we are, and it should be used in that way. But there's plenty of other ways that I think about people analytics and doing that. I actually think should put an end to people focusing their time and resources on the wrong thing and actually living off of anecdotes and assumptions as opposed to data-based facts. And I think that can make organizations better, employees' lives better, and make companies more successful.
Wow, I do like the way you articulated that very much. So it's almost like doing what computers do best and then doing what people do best, and not eliminating either one of those competencies, but sort of bringing them together. And I think that makes a lot of sense, Dane. So I'm glad you explained it that way. I want to talk about something that could be construed as a little negative, but I think it's important. The potential risks and concerns with collecting HR data and deploying people analytics. I know that some employees they think it's creepy. They don't like to feel like they're being surveilled. Vincent, as Bevel grows and your HR capabilities sort of grow exponentially, as you said, is that something you're at all thinking about or concerned about?
Yeah, 100%. I think right now we've been able to, with our small team, be able to build that trust. I definitely foresee as we continue to double in size, it's going to be a little bit trickier and trickier. So I think having someone particularly like in each location, building out the team more thoroughly, making sure that we sort of are able to lean into the data a little bit more. Definitely as we continue to grow, that's a huge potential there. But yeah, I feel like that's one of those things we'll cross when we get there, and I can ask Dane for his help too.
Well, maybe Sean, I'll just throw in. Sorry, Shauna, maybe I'll just throw in a little bit on that too. I think Vincent said the most important word there, which was trust. But what I think is important when we talk about trust is remember that trust is a mutual contract. And so if you're at a company where the people don't want to share data in large numbers, there'll always be some that's just their individual bias, which is fine. But if you have it in large numbers, that is an actual tremendous data point for you to be aware of. And so I think the question really becomes in trust, not how it's sometimes construed, which is why don't our employees trust us? I think the question you should ask back is what am I actually doing to earn their trust? And a big part about that, and this is one thing that you'll hear people say around surveys is, hey, you took a survey, but what did you do with it? How did I benefit from spending whatever the 15 to 20 to 25 minutes in doing that? Did you even show me what was in it? Have you shown me the actions that you're taking? Why is this of value to me in that process? So I think this concept of creating a mutual band of trust and getting out of what I would call the old school thinking of top down, you're lucky to work here, do these things we ask you to do, stop asking questions. That view of the world has to evolve to this is a mutual contract between employee and organization, and as a result, if you're going to ask me to do something, I need to understand the value of what you're asking me to do.
I like everything you said, Dane, and especially what you said about it's almost like a metadata point. If employees are not filling out these surveys and willing to share their feedback in large numbers, that in itself is a piece of information. Like they don't trust leadership and HR, which in itself, as we know, is a big problem. So I did want to, in the time we have left, I did want to ask if there were any other concerns that come up around collecting HR data and deploying, again, people analytics. Anything else that we should sort of be not necessarily worried about, but be vigilant for as the field evolves? Vincent, I'll turn it over to you.
I think for us, I feel Dane's going to have a little bit more insight here. But for us, I think it's just continually be able to, take action on the feedback that we're receiving. In addition, other obstacles. I mean, I haven't really run into a lot just because we're a lot smaller. We've always been really transparent. So I think that being able to share the data in a way that we continue to have that trust with the employee versus, just reporting it. So we're very sensitive about that information. So I think being able to scale quickly, we're going to run into the issue where maybe, we're working with different personalities. How do we make sure that we're still taking care of our people?
Thanks, Vincent. And I see what you're saying about the fact that right now you are sharing that data and feedback back with employees. And so those issues haven't really come up, and hopefully they won't come up because you've established that trust and transparency. Thank you to both our speakers. I know we've learned a lot today about some different and some creative ways to use people analytics. I know I have. And I want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in today. So it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Back to you, Caroline.
Thanks, Shauna. Thank you again to all of our speakers. Today we've learned a lot about the importance of using digital tools to enhance the employee experience and to recruit and retain diverse talent. I hope you were inspired by these conversations. These are topics we continue to cover closely at Insider, and I recommend checking out reporting from Shauna, Aman, and the rest of Insider's careers team. Remember to share your thoughts using the hashtag InsiderEvents. In a few moments, our survey will pop up on your screen. We'd love to hear your feedback. Again, thank you all for joining, and have a great day.